Hello, welcome to the Urban Manifesto. As countries worldwide get a grip on this global pandemic, we're all being forced to think and act creatively. While we're at the cusp of a great economic crisis, potentially worse than the Great Depression of the 1930s, governments around the world have already spent more than $10 trillion to contain this pandemic and its economic impact. We will continue to see tons of resources deployed to come out of this crisis. In the Urban Manifesto series, we are saying that we must use this crisis as an opportunity to build a happier, fairer, greener society. We are so thrilled to bring this series to you in collaboration with the Architecture Foundation. I'm Prathima Manohar, founder of the Urban Vision, and I'm delighted to co-host this series with my colleague Lucy Bullivant, who's the founder of urbanista.org, which is a webzine for livable urbanism. Lucy?
Thank you, Prathima, and hello, everybody. It's lovely to be back on Urban Manifesto again. So today's theme is Copenhagen, the capital city of Denmark. Copenhagen, achieving livability and resilience. And I'm really delighted to welcome our splendid guest today, Camilla Vanderz, who's been the chief city architect for Copenhagen since February 2019. And she is working very, very hard to shape a more livable capital. Before taking this role, she was a partner with Gale Architects, a board member for the Danish Architects Association, and an external professor at Copenhagen University. She's got a master's degree in architecture and a PhD in urban design from the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts School of Architecture. Welcome, Camilla.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on our lovely program. So Copenhagen is one of the world's most sustainable cities and one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing in Europe, and frequently nominated as the most livable. And as Prathima and I have pressed the point on previous Urban Manifesto episodes, in the face of all the myriad environmental challenges cities are facing, from climate change to pollution, health deprivation, destruction of biodiversity, the most advanced political and business leaders and practitioners are really proactive in addressing the various systemic challenges through innovative adaptations, both incremental and disruptive change in terms of their impact. And they're also on this course to try and build economies that redistribute social and environmental goals and transform cities into low and to zero carbon, high quality places where people can live healthily and fulfill their life goals. Now, as Prathima has said, during the pandemic crisis, we have also seen heroic support efforts by local governments, by central government, care sectors, and many businesses, focusing on the precious care for people's lives and communities. And this just has to continue through holistic strategies as we transition into a new era. So looking at Copenhagen, we are very curious to know what is involved in the holistic approach that Camilla is taking in leading on all the new strategic work. How is she focusing increasingly on public investments as a generator and enabling human scale quality of life in the unique city districts that are under development? And what makes these cities' resilience plans so sound? What is next on the agenda for dealing with climate change and livability in Copenhagen? So we really look forward to hearing the key points that Camilla is going to make in a minute about how she is advancing livability and resilience in Copenhagen. And then we will, Prathima and I will draw her out on some of these points that she's going to make. But first, and we ask all our guests this, Camilla, how have you been managing during lockdown?
Well, we were home from March until June, and then back at work until last week, and then we were locked down again. So it's been a little bit back and forward. And I'm quite surprised at how much we actually get done from home. And I must say it's nice to spend a little bit more time with my family. So that's one of the benefits of lockdown, that I get to see my kids a little bit more. So I've enjoyed that. But I must say that I've been quite surprised at how effective everyone within my profession has been in adjusting and getting on Teams, getting on Skype, and just keeping things running. Of course, in the city, there are a lot of my colleagues who are on the ground every day, on the streets and in the nursing homes and so on, that don't have that luxury. So I do feel quite privileged that I can work from home.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's taken a massive amount of patience and courage and resilience and all the best human qualities. So now we are really looking forward to hearing the set of points you're going to convey, illustrated as well by some unique images that most of us have never seen before.
Well, I'll try and share my screen. Let's see. So it's not really opening, so we'll try again. There. Oh, no, it's every time I minimize, it kind of disappears. So here we go. I think it should be appearing now. Can you see this?
Yes.
Yes.
And then I'll just do full screen somehow in the corner here. Okay, so you guys asked me a lot of questions, so I'll see how many of them we can cover. But I think this picture kind of illustrates, for me at least, the spirit of Copenhagen, that we have a very old city, but we have a community that is young at heart and very engaged with the place they live. For those of you who might not know Copenhagen, we are placed in Scandinavia. We're the capital of Denmark, and the municipality is about 360,000 people. In the greater Copenhagen region, we count the southern part of Sweden because we're connected with a bridge, which has been, so that's about 4 million people. And that has been a very large challenge during this lockdown, since a lot of people commute daily from Sweden over the bridge. And due to COVID, that's extremely difficult. We have a growing population, as you mentioned. We are about 10,000 new inhabitants every year. So proportionally, that's quite a lot for us. And one of the interesting things for us is that it's not really so many people moving to Copenhagen, but it's Copenhagen is staying and having children, having babies. So 9 out of 10 of new inhabitants are children. And that's, of course, due to some strategies that have been employed during the later years. I'll mention that a little bit later. But as a city, that's exciting. But it also means that we need to develop and find new areas to build primarily housing. There's a lot of focus on providing affordable housing. As so many other places, that's really the push. So in the municipal plan, all of the red and pink areas in this map used to be old industrial sites, and they are now being transformed into housing districts primarily. So we're really seeing a lot of brownfield development, and one of the challenges for us is to keep some of the architectural heritage of these old industrial sites and integrate that with the new areas. You'll also see a dotted line on this map. That's our new metro, and the new metro is really driving a lot of this development, and the new metro areas are coming in all around the city. Copenhagen has a very long tradition for landfill. On the map to your left, you'll see in white the original shoreline of the city in the 11th century. And all of the pink has been filled in during the last 850 years. And we continue that model now with the North Harbor development, which is on the map to the very, very north tip where it says Nordhavnen. And you can see it on the photo to your left, where we continue to landfill to gain new area for this urban development. So that's really the model. As a city, we are obliged to take the soil from all of the building sites in the city, but also from the metro. And landfill is one way that we are using the soil and then creating new spaces for urban development. As I mentioned, we really have a strong focus on providing political focus on providing affordable housing. In pink, all across the city, you see all of the social housing districts, the affordable housing districts. And one of our main political tools is now in all of the new local area plans, we can ask for 25% affordable housing. So even if a private developer is building, 25% of the housing has to be affordable and at a cost that everyone can pay. So that's really a strong political tool in terms of keeping gentrification low and keeping the population quite mixed. And one of the great projects that we had the last few years has been by big architects, by Bjarke Ingels Group. And to me, this is a social, affordable housing project. And to me, there's just a great a task for our architects to really go into this and provide high quality housing at a low cost. As a city, we're also looking at how do we spend our investments as development engines in these new city areas. So when we're building sports facilities, schools, and so on, how do we really use them to kickstart development in a new city area? And the way we do that is to look at the demographic movements in the different districts of the city in a 10, 20, and 30-year period, and then estimate what does that mean? How many nursing homes do we need? How many public schools, sports facilities, public libraries, and so on? And by using the demographic changes as sort of our dialing point, we have an idea of how much investment do we need to do, and how do we then place this so that we have a synergy and an energy with what's coming and our investment. One of the main political focus also is providing a carbon neutral capital by 2025, which is the ambition of the city. And that's been a development that's been going on since, I would say, the mid-90s in terms of the number of investments in green tech energy, so windmills, central district heating. The bicycle network in Copenhagen is instrumental in that as well. But the two sort of main factors that we need to look at the coming years to achieve this goal is to look at the mobility in the city, so really reduce dramatically the use of cars in Copenhagen, but also look at the building industry and look at the climate impact of all of our construction work. So really discussing how can we build more circular and how can we build in more sustainable building materials like wood. But having these big political ambitions in terms of affordable housing, and then combining that with the sustainability target of carbon neutrality is really for us what is driving a lot of the decisions and the projects that we're doing. Copenhagen, as you might know, is quite famous for having a wonderful cycling infrastructure. So almost 50% of Copenhageners bike and cycle to school and work. And of course, that means that also in terms of COVID, we've had a alternative way of moving around the city. We've seen a drop in our public transit of about 30% during COVID. And unfortunately, that's not something that the experts foresee going back to normal within the next couple of years. But luckily for us, our cycling network has been in place. I mean, I've seen great examples from other cities during COVID where very quickly cycling lanes have been implemented, but we had quite a good network already in place. During COVID, it was decided to make the city center car-free and experiment with that. So over the next 2 years, we're going to do a lot of pilot projects and test out how our city center will become car-free. We're also going to do sort of car-free zones in the boroughs where people the vast majority of people live. And the idea is, of course, to lower the CO2 emissions from the cars, but also to provide or to have less air pollution in our city, because of course, as you all know, that's one of the main problems. Also, the poor air quality and the health risk that imposes. So that's one of the big projects that we'll be working with in the next few years. During the COVID period, it was also decided to build 7 new parks in the city. We really saw, like so many other places, that there was a large push on green areas and a need for public accessible space. So Copenhagen has a green finger plan, which was developed in 1947. That has been the structural plan for all of these years, with sort of a hand and then transportation lines coming out of all the fingers, the S trains. And then green parks and fingers going into the center of the city from that. So our new parks are going to be part of that plan in the new city areas. And then there's a service target also of providing a green space within 300 meters of all homes in the city. So over the next few years, I hope that will dramatically make the city much more green visually to look at. A project that is trying to combine some of these efforts is a brand new project, Fælleby, which is 219,000 square meters of wooden construction. It's going to be a car-free city, or part of the city district, including schools, nursing homes, daycare, kindergarten, shops, and so on. But really, for the first time, for us at least, to attempt to have a city district massively built in wood, and to have the city district be completely car-free. This is designed by Henning Larsen Architects. Another political driver for us is climate adaptation. We had about 10 years ago a number of floods in the city. And on top of that, the city decided to have an implementation plan for flooding. So we have 300 projects all over the city in public spaces. So all of the streets and the squares have to be changed over the next couple of years, an investment of about $1.5 billion. So quite a serious investment that's driving a lot of the public space designs during the next 20 years. And this is just an example from the area right close to the theater house and the Royal Palace, of an example of a newly designed climate adaptation project that, at least in my mind, very sort of sensitively interprets a old Baroque city plan, and has a landscape architecture that has a capacity to hold a lot of water. Underneath there are some large tanks, water tanks, but also quite sensitively works with the architecture of the city. On a more wider scale, we're also looking at our sidewalks and creating a new sidewalk that can hold water and store it. So really looking at both star projects in the squares and the public spaces, but also the entire fabric of the city, using something as simple as our sidewalks as part of the solution. So that's the water that's coming from above, the rainwater. We also have a challenge in Copenhagen of both our groundwater rising, but also the seawater, with an estimated rise of 1.2 meters over the next 50 to 100 years. And then, as an illustration, you can see in the dark blue here all of the areas of the central city that will be flooded if we do not act in terms of creating a seawall barrier. So for Copenhagen, the solution that we've selected is to create a seawall both to the north and to the south. What we hope to do is to extend some of these green parks and corridors, so that we have not only a passive seawall, but we have a active shorefront park that provides new opportunities for recreational space to sort of right-hand side in the diagrammatic map, you'll see a new city area that's been dotted in, and that is the island that we are starting to construct from next year using this landfill model. It's called Lynetteholmen. And over the next 50 years, we'll be using the same landfill model that we've used in other parts of the city to create a water barrier. There's going to be a gate as well, like you maybe know from Venice and London, other cities that have water gates. But this new part of the city will provide a home for hopefully 35,000 residents and a lot of jobs. So Copenhagen is really continuing with this as an active strategy to create more spaces. The last topic that I'd like to mention is that we are very grateful and pleased that in 2023, Copenhagen will be the world's capital of architecture. So we're using this target or this event as a driving force to really talk to everyone in the industry in terms of showcasing livability and sustainable solutions for that year. So I'd like to invite all of you to come in 3 years. Hopefully we can all travel by then, and to come and share my city and experience it for yourself. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Camilla. I love that image of them standing up on their hands. I mean, yes, it's absolutely a consummate example of joined up thinking. I think the points you've made are really joined up thinking. And thinking about where we kick off with the questions, I mean, we're both, Prathima and I, we're both extremely interested in your resilience plans, and particularly the merit of using nature-based design tactics to manage climate events. I mean, you've outlined the initiatives taken since the 2012 cloudburst 8 years ago. And I think you've shown us images, maybe not on this occasion, but the plan, one thing that I appreciate is the plan at Norebro, which was Copenhagen's first district adapted for climate change, is for the city to develop the methods and expertise there that will be used for future-proofing in the rest of the city against heavier rain and torrential downpours. So that is an interesting in terms of tactics. Also, I think that the key principle is that the city's climate adaptation strategy is not only about solving problems like this of an acute nature, but it's also a really sound way of creating opportunities for improving quality of life in the city through socioeconomic benefits. I mean, basically what you've seemed to have done, you've got like a dual purpose. So the numbers of significant public areas are protect against these, but they're also being remade as recreational areas. So you are combining agendas, which obviously makes good, sound financial sense, producing maximum benefit. So how far would you say, since you've been in your job nearly a year and a half, how far is this strategic approach? What are the next steps, and how are you measuring the success of these integrated initiatives?
I think for us, the climate quarter that you mentioned in Norebro has really been a testing bed for all of these initiatives, and we've been happy to receive a lot of international visitors as well to share these experiences. And there we've been developing both solutions on the ground. So in this area, we discovered with the help of Third Nature, the architecture company that has led the strategy, that 80% of the surface of the public space was unused asphalt. So by removing that and replacing with a lot of nature-based landscaping and increased biodiversity, we've been able to handle a lot of the rainwater there. And then at the same time, we've been engaging with all of the building owners and all of the homes around these public spaces to take the rainwater off the sewage system and have it treated locally. So having experienced some of the challenges there, and I mean, there are real challenges, like we're a winter city, a winter country, and that means that we use salt during the winter to make the snow and the ice disappear. And that's really a challenge, suddenly we find out, when we have all of the rainwater being led into all of the green like bassins and all of these new trees we've planted. So we've had to micromanage that. We found out that there's a lot of outwash of some of the gravels and the sands into some of the drains, and that means that the expenditure for maintenance has been, I dare almost say, 50 times more expensive than we expected. Yeah. And as a city, those are costs that when you take it from one project up to a city scale that we can't work with. So I think this kind of testing in an area has been really important for us, but also being very frank and very honest with the mistakes that we've made in this first phase. We have 9 out of the 300 projects complete. And that's after years. So that's quite slow. But I think what we've done is made all of the groundwork. So now all of the city, all of the nature, or sort of all of the districts have been categorized, and there's a master plan for all of the districts. And now they're really beginning to roll out in every single street. And I think in terms of the city, what we're seeing is that the streets become bluer and they become greener. And so they become much more livable and much more inviting spaces for people living in these neighborhoods. So there's a really sort of livability benefit of doing it at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and thank you so much for clarifying a few of those issues. We drew you out on that because ultimately this cohesive thinking that you're creating spaces that are fit for purpose and are very resilient in terms of quality of life and enjoyment, as well as doing the job of climate proofing too, which is a very sophisticated approach that we are only really starting to see the beginning of. And next time I get to Copenhagen, I want to go to Osterbro. Is it Osterbro?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay, so Prathima, what's your thoughts?
Oh, I actually remember being in Copenhagen a couple of years ago and looking at some of those pilot square, and I completely agree with you, Camilla, about the quality of life improvements while adding nature back into the city. And I think historically we've always talked about resilience and managing climate events as a big engineering project, and I think I was just fascinated on how we can use nature to manage some of this while, also enabling well-being and livability for the residents. And, that's a point that I want to focus on. There's, in Copenhagen, there's been a lot of focus on quality of human scale and public space and public life. And you've said on other occasions that city building is a slow process. And at the same time, whatever is built will clearly have major physical, sociological, and cultural impact for a long, long time, which means that, we have to think about every small scale project and how it impacts quality of life for all the residents. And obviously, Copenhagen as a city has had its, industrial heritage, and it's kind of being adapted constantly to accommodate this aspect of well-being and inclusion in city making. So give us a sense of what have been the key drivers of change over the last few decades. And, how did this shift towards public space and public life come about?
Well, in terms of, I'd like to mention two things. In terms of the public or the urban development, one of the really big changes was as a city to change the building standards. So all apartments had to be 95 square meters on average. And that meant that the city really tried in the 90s up to last year to attract families. And that's really been the driving force between the urban renewal and having families stay, and with families, more children. And that really drives, the need for a greener, more healthy, safe city to navigate when there's a lot of children, you have a young population. Now we're seeing a bit of a shift and understanding that you don't necessarily need that many square meters as a family. People are starting to live differently, and families are many sizes now. So that's been challenged. But I think for Copenhagen, of course, it's also been the luck that one of our great urban thinkers, Jan Gehl, was Danish and studied Copenhagen for so many years, and really used the argumentation of studying how people move in public space and how they react to these physical changes over time. And by Jan documenting how people moved and just simple things like saying, okay, every time you remove a parking space from the inner city, I can actually see and document that 2 more people are coming to the city center to partake in public activities, to go shopping, to do cultural activities. So that kind of documentation has always been a really strong political argument in terms of taking these difficult decisions to take out the cars. So, the good luck of having urban researchers in our city that have been doing that research for 50, 60 years has, I think, been instrumental in really telling the story that to live in the city, you need great public spaces, and you need a space that's walkable and cyclable. And for Copenhagen, I think that the great luck was that we very early on created our cycle lanes on the streets and not in the parks. So we have a very widespread day-to-day network that's not only recreational, but really something that's we can see now almost 50% of the population are using.
Yeah, it's one of the most cycle-friendly cities in the world. And yeah, it's full of infrastructure that makes cycling so easy.
But I think for us, the first 50 years of the cycle revolution in Copenhagen, we've been, doing a lot of investments, but now we're at a point where the investments are really difficult and really expensive. So it's adding more bridges across the water. It's creating really complex, interesting bicycle parking hubs by the station. And I'm really inspired by some of the work that has been going on in Holland, where they also have a great cycle tradition, and I think are more advanced in terms of cycle parking and cycle hubs and intermodal transport than we are. So I think we've done the easy bit to get 50% on the bikes, and now there's a lot of quite expensive investments in front of us.
Yeah.
Great. So, Camilla, you've spoken in a very engaging way about the plans for affordable housing, for the strides that you're taking to advance the quality of housing and people's quality of life. If we think about how we evaluate city livability, it seems that it is very essential to distinguish between quality of life and standard of living. And in Europe especially, quality of life does really also include the extent to which social cohesion is deepened and social exclusion is diminished and social capital is grown. So one question I'd like to ask you is, how are you planning to achieve quality of life in this sense, social cohesion, diminished social exclusion, and building social capital? And
that's big questions.
I know but it's one that's so pertinent to London, and therefore I know Copenhagen is not on the scale of London, but nonetheless, So are there I think it is a very relevant question. And which areas of the city would you say currently demonstrate the strongest impacts in this respect?
So I think the new regulations that mean that we can ask for 25% affordable housing with every new development is really important, so that we're sort of pepper potting and creating a mixture of housing units all over the city within every single project. And in terms of public investments, as I mentioned earlier, one of our biggest investment is in our public schools. Really using the schools as public sort of generators, cultural houses, sports facilities. They become the libraries, the meeting points, the community kitchens in a neighborhood. So, the main bulk of our public investment is actually going into creating really great schools that become sort of cultural hubs in the new neighborhoods. So I think those are the two strategies that are most important for us. So getting sort of a balance of housing types within the city districts, and then really using the schools as generators in these new city districts. I rather like the North Harbor area of Copenhagen in terms of the architectural mix, but it is a quite expensive area. So there we've not succeeded yet with this diversification strategy in terms of affordability. But a new area like the Ørestad area, which is closer to the airport, has a much more sort of balanced mix of different housing income. So I think, we're also learning as we go, and hopefully evaluating our urban districts and becoming better and better every time we build.
Well, I think that your focus, obviously the focus on affordable housing is absolutely essential, but I think that your focus on the schools, the new schools social infrastructure is absolutely central, particularly given the particular demographics of Copenhagen, with so many children and so many people moving to the city and then having children. So you are, as you said, social infrastructure as a generator.
And we're trying to match all the schools so that it's not a public school, but it's a public school and a swimming hall, or it's a public school and a community dining hall, or a library, or a collaboration with the design school. So all of the schools have a theme that creates a certain, character within that district. And of course, as a city, it's also a way of saving money, because we're not building both a school and a library.
Yeah. Yeah, it's intelligent.
We also have that concern.
Yeah, very, very intelligent mixed use, which is such a, you're dovetailing different functions together. Fantastic.
But then we're saying, when we do this, so naturally we want the school to be in the best location. We want it to be attached to a great public space. We wanted to provide, a football field so that in the afternoon the kids can hang out, and ideally there should be a green park next to it. So we're really trying to overlay some of these functions. And then we're saying, well, then our nursing home should be next to that. So there's a social balance, or sort of an impact between the elderly citizens and the kids. So really trying to use our investments and program them, because a lot of city districts are quite dead in the first years. As you say, city building takes time. But by strategically placing some of these public functions, we can maybe start to kickstart some of the interesting developments.
Yeah. And also your policy about the intergenerational proximity of different generations, I think, is very, very intelligent. I mean, as I said, joined up thinking. Absolutely.
But it's not easy, because and I'm just going to be really honest about it. Like, this is not a fairy tale, because it's two different budgets in the city. So the youth budget and the senior budget are in two different departments, and to align that takes a lot of coordination, a lot of meeting, and a lot of political will. So it's it's not easy, but it can be done.
One of my sorry, go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, are you winning the argument though?
Yeah, I think so. I think so, because we are seeing a number of different arguments. We're both winning, the one that says it's cheaper to do, so it's better for our budget, but also in terms of user feedback, like, are people happy to live there? Yes, they're happier to live in these areas. So it's both a financial argument, but also in terms of livability and quality of life.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, Prathima, we both spoke at the same time. Go ahead.
Look, one of my favorite examples of social inclusion, and this is as a visitor to the city, I didn't spend a lot of time there, was the urban space project in the neighborhood of Norebro, which was designed by big architects again. It was just a design. It was almost design as art, right? It was a half a mile long urban space in one of what I was told, one of the toughest socially challenged neighborhoods in the city of Copenhagen or even in Denmark. And using a great quality public space to increase social cohesion and inclusion. That was a great example. Are you doing a lot of that as well?
I mean, I think one of the things that's so interesting about that example is that it's within our ethnically most diverse neighborhood. And one of the ideas was to take public furniture from, I think, 85 different locations around the world and include that, and to say that, people's backgrounds and people's culture also have a home in our city as a physical manifestation of that. One of the things, like, the terms of social inclusion, we're working on like a micro and a macro level, large scale, small scale, all the time with this. And I think one of the little programs that I enjoy a lot is a bicycle program where youth can volunteer to take the senior citizens in bicycle taxis, and then they take them around the city, and the seniors share stories about their childhood and their youth. And I think that's a really, really nice program that brings the seniors out of the nursing homes and like shares the joy of bicycling, but also creates that connection between the generations. I think in terms of ethnicity, this is something that we're still not as good as at addressing as other cultures like the UK, where the tradition of having different cultures and creating a balance has been longer than us. But I think, there's a few projects coming up that try to be more sensitive, and we try to have a more open discussion in terms of discussing, what do you need in the city, and that city spaces have to be very different to accommodate different kinds of needs and wishes. Like a lot of Muslim families living in Copenhagen enjoy having very large picnics and lots of picnic tables together, where ethnic Danes want to sit alone. So just understanding those patterns and then creating spaces that are either flexible, that can accommodate different kinds of groups and sizes of groups, or creating them next to each other so that you can be together in the same space. I think are some of the strategies that we're employing.
Yeah, I think that's just I love the visual of intergenerational inclusion, with the young kids interacting with the senior citizens in such a fun way. That was great. Camilla, my next question to you is, Copenhagen is widely known for a strong focus on livability and well-being of citizens. It's probably number one as a people-centric city around the world. But you're, at the same time pushing for strong, green goals. You want to be zero carbon. I think you are at the kind of vanguard of resilient city strategies, already kind of integrating resilience through urban designs in various neighborhoods. How are you how have you managed to do this? How have you been able to engage the wide city, stakeholders, to enable this agenda of green plus livability?
I think green has really not become an issue until the last few years. So it's only this year that we've been mandated to create a biodiversity strategy. So I think what really started the movement in Copenhagen was a focus on urban space, which was more sort of gray urban space and the cycling networks. But I think that what has been strong is also that regardless of the political direction, the general sort of vision has been the same during the last 50 years. So there's been this interest in creating a livable small city. So we talk about the 15-minute city as a city that within 15 minutes of walking or cycling, you should have all of your needs cared for. And that's really been a guiding principle for almost 50 years now. So, the direction has been the same regardless of the political landscape. And I think that's some of the benefits that we're reaping now. But in terms of the sustainable movement, like so many other places, I think there's been a couple of generations and iterations. Previously there was a lot of focus on technical solutions. So creating the district heating system, which has been a huge project in Copenhagen, where now 95% of all of the households are connected to our district heating. And the way that works is that all of the household garbage is incinerated and turned into to electricity and heating. But what we're seeing now is the transitions into windmills, so greener energy, even greener energy. And that's possible on a district level or a city level because we've made that investment from the 90s and up to today. And as a city, we now have a strategy to reduce our waste disposal by 70%, and that's not only the household waste but also the industrial waste and the building industry waste, which is a large part of that. So to have that ambition, we have to really make some difficult decisions because in order to recycle that much, it takes up a lot of space in the streets, in the squares, in the courtyards, in the households, inside your own kitchen. Yeah. And we have to make the difficult decisions, like in the streets, do we provide spaces for bicycle parking or for trees or for recycling? Those are really difficult questions in a medieval city where there are limited spaces. But I think for us, what's driving it is all the time this CO2 ambition, because that's what we return to. Okay, if we want to be carbon neutral, what is the best decision to take? And that's being sort of the test all the time, because of course trees are green, and recycling is green, and bicycling is green. So how do we balance this, right?
Yeah. I think it's becoming more and more important, right? Like, for example, thinking about biodiversity as we make these urban plans is going to become more and more crucial now that links are being drawn to the era of pandemic and biodiversity loss. I think we are already seeing scientists speak about why we are in the era of pandemics like COVID, and linking it to biodiversity loss. So any urban development or planning we have to do in the coming era has to focus on that. So, and I think Copenhagen has already showed the way for all of us, and I hope that other cities can draw inspiration from it.
Yeah, I mean, but we're just starting to really understand and work with biodiversity. So we're going to be developing our strategy over the next years, but there are other cities, Paris among them, that are ahead of us that we have to look to. So, in this small world, it's always great to have contact between all of the various professionals working in this industry to learn from each other, so that we are, building on top of each other's experiences.
Lucy?
Yes, and Camilla, our British, internationally known climate change expert activist David Attenborough would be so happy to hear that. His most hard-hitting BBC documentary, Extinction, The Facts, screened just on Monday night, was just so chilling and so compelling. And he made the point that he may himself, at the age of 94, still so active, not be around to see some of the advances in supporting biodiversity. So I pray and hope that he will be able to go to Copenhagen in the new year and see what you're doing. So my question next off is about active citizen participation and bottom-up solutions, because as we've said, Copenhagen's definitely got a solid tradition for engaging and listening to citizens' demands for the city. And I think, it was in the 60s, people demanded a stronger focus on pedestrians and cyclists' freedoms in planning. And that led to the foundation of the focus on walking and cycling. And then the creation of the Harbour Park was similarly due to local demands. So today, the city administration and politicians pay great attention to citizens' needs and demands. And inhabitants, people are asked to, to support communities through local gardening and, as you said, waste management. So how are you shifting the equilibrium in planning towards even more active citizen participation and bottom-up solutions?
So the newest experiment that we've been doing is in terms of city panels, I think we call them. Citizen assemblies, I think is the more correct international term, where we've been inspired by Toronto. That's worked with this for a number of years. And I think Wales has also been doing it in terms of some of their legislation, where citizens are invited to more directly give advice to politicians. And we use the citizen assembly for the project about removing cars in our inner city. So within the medieval core, I showed you a map earlier. And the citizen assembly advice was taken into account and became the official policy of the city. So that's like one of the new formats that we've been using, and that we hope to use more in terms of maybe also local area planning, where it's not been so used so much.
Great, that's really good to hear.
And then we always, do a lot of pilots, we do a lot of testing. We have a tradition for experimenting a lot in public spaces. And so like right now we have a project which I think is really fun, where we're doing little vegetable gardens outside 2 schools and providing healthier food choices, and working with the supermarkets to take away all the junk around the schools, and then trying to see can we, by changing some of the physical environment, actually create better and more healthy options for children in schools in terms of their diets. And so creating all of these the test projects are a way for us to kind of, in the tradition of Jan Gehl, see how things are going, research them, evaluate them, and then roll it out on a larger urban scale.
Great, fantastic. And what about permaculture with compost pits using carbon and nitrogen? So the food waste, the paper waste from schools and universities, that can all be used to be put into a big compost pit to enrich the nutrients in the soil. So it's fun to watch it being done as well.
Yeah, I mean we've been doing that for a few years, and the newest thing that we're doing is taking all of the cuttings from trees and branches and so on, and creating bio charcoal, which is something we've learned from Stockholm. So creating biocharcoal and putting in all the tree pits, because it can store much more water and it releases nutrients for the trees, which is really beneficial. So trying to come up with creative ways of using the waste that we generate in the city. And we have a new recycling plant in the South Harbor of the city, where we every 3 months have 12 new startup businesses come in and then work with all the recycling waste that comes in and sort of create business models around recycling and creating new products. So we're trying to support some of the business startups by providing the materials and the access to our recycling plants.
Brilliant, wonderful. Prathima?
Camilla, when I was in Copenhagen, I visited the upcoming neighborhood of North Haven. And it's really one of the most fascinating plans of the city. And I know it's being developed without any building codes. And I actually remember being in one of the buildings, which was a parking lot, but had an amazing park on top.
That's one of my favorite buildings, actually. So it's a parking lot. So instead of building individual parking lots under all of the buildings, which of course uses a lot of concrete, which is about one of the most unsustainable things you can do. And in a city where the groundwater is also rising, we don't want all of the concrete pushing up the groundwater levels. So it has a multi-story car park, but it also has a supermarket. It has a recycling station where you can deliver your things. And then on top, it has a playground and a park. So it's really a multifunctional building. And this is, again, this example of a public investment and how can we make the parking garage an event. And it's constructed so that in 50 years, if we stop using cars, we can take it down or repurpose it into something more useful. Which is my biggest problem with all the parking garages that are being built, that they're dead. They're dead in 50 years. And we're using so many materials to pour into the ground.
Yeah.
So tell us about this district which is being developed without building codes. I think it was a consultant from Ramboll, Henrik Novak, who called it, it's almost gives you the feel of suburbia, yet it's compact and accessible and super livable. And tell us about how
we do have some codes.
Yeah.
But they have been in this project. Of course, there are the building codes in terms of FAR and how much you can build to maintain sunlight into the homes and have the fire regulations, and all of these things are of course controlled. But in terms of the architecture, the building codes have been a little more loose to try to create more diversity and to invite for innovation. But in some terms, in this neighborhood, we're actually quite strict. For instance, we do say that we want edge zones. We want every building to have an active edge zone, because that's where the private space meets the public space and you have that social interaction. So in some areas, we're loosening up and to have this diversity and create innovation. And in other areas where we have an important statement, we're actually very, very tough and say you have to have an edge zone. It has to have a bench. It has to have a door so that you can walk from your apartment into public space and meet your neighbors.
But it's pushing the envelope on architecture and kind of rethinking programming because of the lack of building codes, huh?
Mm-hmm. But also trying to protect some of the architectural heritage of the industrial buildings. So one of the things I appreciate in this neighborhood is also that the old silo buildings that used to be grain storage are the highest structures. They've been repurposed into apartments, but they are still sort of the landmarks of that district. And then all of the rest of the district is 5-6 stories, perimeter block buildings. So you very clearly have a sense of the development as it's going on. And there's been a lot of care to keep as many as possible of the old buildings and sort of work the modern architecture into them. which is challenging. But I think it creates a lot of character that other new areas that sort of starting from scratch are missing.
Yeah, I think it looked really a great place to hang out, and I especially love that park and play building. It's very cute. I wanna.
And one thing it does very nicely, at least in our climate, because Copenhagen is a winter city, but it's also a city by the ocean, so we have a lot of wind, and all of the blocks are sort of not to an angle, but just kind of off. So the grid is a little jiggled, which blocks the wind and creates a nice microclimate inside development. So even though it's very windy by the seaside, you can also always go into the development and find a local park that has a better microclimate. Yeah. And that's important in a Nordic country that you want to be on.
Yeah.
I want to quickly say hello to the audience that is joining us from across the world, actually. We have Teresa Torres from Curitiba, Brazil, Naveen Rao from Sikkim in India. We have Valentina Aldescu and Saurav Katke. Hello, everyone. It's so nice to have all of you today in this conversation. If you have any questions for Camilla, please write it in the video box below, and we will try to take as many as we can. Lucy?
Yes, so while you're rustling up your questions, we're going to carry on at speed. I've got one more, Prathima's got one more. So Camilla, so my question now is, Copenhagen, as I've enjoyed so immensely when I've been there, has worked really strategically to create fast and visible temporary or meanwhile projects for citizens and visitors to use and experience the city in transition. And many of these projects are purely leisure related, and they support quality of everyday life. Some of them are permanent, others are then replaced by permanent constructions of a different kind. Tell us how Meanwhile has contributed to livability in Copenhagen, and which project, in your view, has been of most significant in this category to date?
So I think the Meanwhile strategy has been a way of opening up new city districts as they develop. So all of them, as I said initially, used to be brownfield industry. So it's really been a way of sort of activating the areas as the planning process has been going on, while there's been the political decision and the local area plans and so on have been decided. I think the most successful developments are the one where the Meanwhile activities have actually left an impact. And one of my favorite areas is what's known as the Paper Island, which is where all of the newspaper reels were stored. So these big reels of paper that were used to make newspaper. And as that industry left the city, a temporary food market opened in these beautiful old halls by the waterfront. And the new area that's now being developed is using exactly the same scale space, and the same function will come back into the new development. So for me, that sort of link is important, because often the Meanwhile projects become very endearing. And people have they're very fun, very creative, and unfortunately we've seen a couple of developments where the Meanwhile projects have been much more exciting than the final city project, which is a bit of a shame.
Yeah, it happens, definitely. You quickly?
That's one thing that we're asking now. How will what you learn in the Meanwhile project influence your final project? I think this Meanwhile strategy, we've seen cities everywhere deploy it during COVID, right? So everyone is doing like temporary parking spaces into cafes, new fitness equipment in parks. Like, I think COVID has in that way really opened Meanwhile up for a lot of cities.
Yeah. Can you quickly just flag up for us, tell us exactly what is novel about the development behind the station that you told me about the other day in respect of, imaginative use of meanwhile?
So there's an old railway track area behind our central station, which is about 500,000 square feet. And that's going to be a new urban district. For 100 years, it was surrounded by railway and completely closed off for the city. And one of the exciting, meanwhile, projects that has come in has been an organic farm, but it's community based. So people from the neighborhoods around it are volunteering and building this community farm itself by themselves, which creates already a connection to the site. And then on the upper floors of the community farm, it's a lot of green tech startups are moving in. And then we've placed a temporary school beside this community farm. And that means that we already have this link of children using the space and having education and classes in terms of sustainable food production in the city. So I think for me, that's one of the really exciting new projects. And luckily, we've had a discussion now with the building owners that it's going to be permanent. So the meanwhile is becoming permanent in this area.
Fantastic. I think it's also very interactive and performative, which a younger generation will really, really enjoy. We're going to fast forward because we do have now one question from Sadiq Kaliam, who has asked, what is the possibility of integrating heavy industries within the city to decrease the impact of transportation? Does that,
Yeah, that's difficult. I mean, Copenhagen is a harbor city. So for so many years, everything was shipped in and all the industry was along the harbor. And a lot of that has moved out now, freeing up all of these brownfield sites that we're using for development. There's been a lot of fantasy projects in Copenhagen. Can we use the metro in the nighttime to transport goods? But I don't think we've really solved it yet. One thing that we are turning to is complete electric. So electrifying all of the transportation, all of the goods coming in and out, which of course will provide more sustainability. But heavy industry, we haven't really nailed that. It's moved out of the city now.
Okay, great. Prathima?
Should I take the last question or wait for more? We have one more question. From Harshal Botra. What are your views on senior citizens living in the city center, I guess? Is that the question? Yeah. What are your views on senior citizens living? Is that going to help in lifestyle?
So I think one interesting movement that we're seeing right now in Copenhagen is that there's a very large wish for the senior citizens to live in co-housing developments. So as a city, we're building, I think, 4 or 7 new co-housing developments that we're supporting. And some of them are, just open for everyone. And then some of them are also lifestyle based. So we have a LGTB co-housing senior citizens home. So really trying to be very wide in the way that we're addressing this. And I think that's a trend that we're seeing in the city also as real estate prices increase, that there's a lot more desire for smaller size homes, so micro living, but then with large community spaces and community-based living, not only among our seniors, but also among families in the city. So those are the kinds of new exciting projects that are coming up.
I'll do my last question and then we can wrap up because we're completely out of time on this one.
It's fine.
We've seen that, the administrative and the political side in the city has pushed for the agenda for people-centric, accessible, safe design. We also understand that the city doesn't really, we're not really seeing the culture of architecture in Copenhagen. We've seen the city turning down. I mean, you have your own set of architects, obviously, but we see that many projects by international architects have been turned down due to the need to protect the Copenhagen context. Tell us a bit about this. I know the neighborhood in the outskirts of the city, Ostad, I don't know how to pronounce that.
That's perfect. That's perfect.
Ostad. Yeah, that's full of architecture, but we've not seen that in the inner city very much. Is this a slightly conservative approach to thinking about design?
I don't think it's intentional. I mean, in the beginning of the 2000s, with my predecessor, Jan Christiansen, when he was the city architect, he was very conscious of this and invited foreign architects to come to Copenhagen to do the competitions about our new architecture center, our new university, our big like a TV station concert hall, which is by Jean Nouvel. We had a Daniel Libeskind Jewish Museum, Daniel Libeskind Hotel. OMA did the architecture centers. There was a lot of focus in the early 2000s to kind of break that and have foreign architects come to Copenhagen. In the later years, I must say, they've not been successful in winning the competitions. It's not that they're not invited, but I think Copenhagen is quite sensitive in terms of scale and a particular sense of materiality that we quite enjoy. So often the successful projects are in some way in understanding that and interpreting that. And of course, that can be seen as exclusional. But I think the really talented architects can actually work with that and interpret that. And one of my favorite examples is by the Dutch urban planner Sødt Søders, where he built a new part of the area, Sluseholmen, in the South Harbor. And he did that by interpreting the traditional Copenhagen courtyard and then sort of modernizing that and creating a new version of the city by the sea. So I think key to building in Copenhagen is really understanding our architectural heritage and then providing new answers to some of the dilemmas. But we do have, I mean, Bjarke Ingels Group and are native to Copenhagen, so we have our own architect. And I think Bjarke's company has done some wonderful projects that highlight some of the challenges and the changes that I've talked about. So in 2004, they built a new harbor bath in the city harbor. And that was the first of now 7 harbor baths all around the harbor front. And it really became a symbolic project for telling the story about the city and the water of the city now becoming clean enough to swim in. They've also built the incinerating plant for our household waste, which has a ski slope on top of it. And they've also built this recycling station that I mentioned, where we have startups coming in and working with the waste. So they've done a lot of transformative projects that really discuss some of the more sort of sustainability challenges, but do it in a fun, livable, recreational way, and sort of add a layer of livability on top of the technical infrastructure, like a waste to power plant is. That's a very technical structure, but it's also now a destination and a park and a ski slope in the city.
Yeah. That was it was not completed when I was there, but I can't wait to come back.
And it's really, really fun to ski. It's fast.
Yeah. This was such a great conversation. Thank you, Camilla, for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I must stress, I think Copenhagen has it's a great reputation, but as you can hear, there's so many things that we're still learning, and where we are inspired by other places and other cities. So thank you for being part of that community and sharing these stories between everyone who's working in this field.
Thank you, Camilla. Lucy, last words.
Yeah, it was immensely illuminating. I mean, I pride myself on, I feel I might know quite a lot about Copenhagen, but I genuinely learned a lot more from what you said today. And Prathima has been there more times than I have, I think. And you've also learned a lot. So that's the whole point. It's win-win. The audience, we learn, audience learns. But it really did give a very vivid picture of where things are now, but also where you've been, the challenges you've faced, and also a pretty strong sense of where you're going to go to in the future. So we look forward to being back in Copenhagen very soon.
Thank you. I can't wait too.
Yeah, thank you so much.
In 2023.
Yes, and definitely then, if not before. Yeah.
Well,
thank you, Camilla. Have a great day. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And stay tuned for the upcoming episodes of Urban Manifesto. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.